Okay, this is chapter 34 of Book 4 of Caesar, and we have just been given an extensive description of what the charioteers of the British are like, culminating in describing them running along the pole and standing on the yoke and running back to their chariot. So now that we know all about them, we're going to see how they affect the actual battle. So, quibus rebus per teritis nostris noetate pugnae tempore optissimo Caesar auxilium tulit. There is a parade of ablatives here at the very beginning of this. There are different types of ablatives. It would behoove you greatly, I would think, to make sure you know what all these ablatives are and how to translate them. Quibus rebus at the very beginning are ablative of means that refer back to the charioteers, and all of these things. So you would say sort of, and with these things, it starts with a relative pronoun, quibus, which we've seen a lot and we're going to see a lot of. So literally with which things, referring back to basically all of 33. And it also, so it describes their way of fighting, so the means, so with these things, with the means of these things. Per teritis nostris is an ablative absolute, and the way that you can differentiate this is that not only is it a noun, nostris, in the ablative, but there's also a participle, which is the real distinctive key of an ablative absolute. It's not just two nouns, but it's a noun and a participle, so a verby sort of thing. With our, and there's an understood men or soldiers, of course, having been greatly disturbed or having been thrown into confusion. The greatly part of this is that per as a prefix, which means sort of all the way through or completely. They're completely confused. And that noetate pugnae. Pugnae is not actually ablative. It's genitive, but noetate is. Noetate comes from the adjective, or is related to the adjective novus, which means new. This is the noun form of that. So like the novelty, the newness of the fighting, of the fight, sort of the way of fighting, which is talking about the chariots. So with our soldiers having been greatly disturbed by the novelty of the fighting, would be those two ablatives put together. And the book tells you that because by the novelty of fighting really sort of repeats what quibus rebus means, like with these things, which refers back to the type of fighting that the charioteers do. Some people think that these two words, this little phrase, doesn't belong in the Latin, which is why in our version it had little brackets around it, so it's kind of a contested phrase, but it's in our book, so we'll use it. And that's an ablative of cause, sort of they're perturbed because of the novelty of the fights. Tempore optissimo is an ablative of time when. And then Caesar auxilium tulit is the main sentence, actually. If you took away all of our ablatives, the sentence is just Caesar auxilium tulit. Caesar brought help. Tempore opportunissimo just means at the most opportune moment, right? At the most suitable moment. So that's a superlative ablative, opportunissimo, and it's just like the English word opportune. And tempore is time, moment. It might be good now to just do a little review about time words, so that it's something that we see a lot. So let me get my little piece of paper. And so if we're looking at a timeline, there's three different ways that we can discuss time in English or in Latin. It can either be a dot on the timeline, a section of the timeline, so like a sort of a line segment or something like that, or a circle above the timeline. So the dot on the timeline is going to be ablative of time when. I think I've drawn a little face. So that is like, I have a doctor's appointment on Tuesday, or I have a doctor's appointment at 3 o'clock. So that tells you when something is. The line segment, or the sort of section of the line, is going to be accusative duration of time, which is just what it sounds like. It tells you how long something happens. So I'll be at the doctor for 2 hours, right? And we'll see another one. So it talks about a storm rose up for several days. So that just tells you duration, and it's a line on the time segment, right? And then the circle is sort of the hardest one for English speakers. It's ablative time within which. So that's just when you say, like, I'm going to go to the doctor in 3 days. So there's a period of time, and in that period of time, I'm going to the doctor. So I'm going to the doctor on Tuesday, it would be ablative of time when. I'll be there for 3 hours, would be accusative duration of time. And I'll have to go back to the doctor in a year. So like within a year, I will have to go back to the doctor. Time within which is ablative. And these match onto positions, like locations. So a dot on a map would be ablative place where, and accusative shows direction toward, and then ablative also shows direction away. So there's 2 ablative things and 1 accusative thing for location. Ablative is place where and separation, right? Direction away, and accusative is direction toward. Okay, just a little review. Namque eius adventu hostes constiterunt. Namque, we see nam a lot. Nam means for. Namque is an intensive for, so like, and indeed, for indeed. Are you going to say indeed? Indeed. Eius adventu. Adventu is another ablative. We've gotten a lot of them so far. And here, an ablative of cause. Because of his, which is your eius, arrival, right? Adventu is from the verb advenio, advenire, to arrive, as the noun form, adventu. Hostes constituerunt. The enemy sort of stood still. We've seen this before. It's to like stand their ground, but here it means kind of they stopped. He brought help, and indeed because of his, you can say like by his arrival, with his arrival, the enemy stood still. They stopped. Nostri se ex timore receperunt. Nostri is our subject. Our, and the understood, soldiers. Se refers back to our soldiers themselves. Ex timore, from fear. And then receperunt, they took themselves back, right? They put themselves together, right? They took themselves from fear. They regrouped themselves from fear. All right, so they're getting beaten by the British, like the surprise, or they were out picking wheat, and Caesar arrived with all of those legions that he had called together previously. Remember, he exchanged the guards on duty and brought out a whole bunch of legions when they saw the big cloud of dust. That was unusual. Quo facto, ad lacescendum hostem et committendum proelium aulienum esse temptus arbitratus. Okay, we'll stop there. Quo facto is a little ablative, absolutely, and the quo refers back to the previous sentence. It's that relative pronoun. With which things having been done is literally what it says. The book suggests, and even though all these things were accomplished, or even though these things were accomplished. And then all of this next part we get is dependent on arbitraris, which means to think or to judge, and it's a participle. It looks like a perfect passive participle, but it's deponent, so it has that active sense, like having thought or having judged. And it's followed by an indirect statement. So we expect our subject to be accusative and our verb to be infinitive, and that's what all this thing between Odd and Tempus is. It's he having judged. In English, we have the word an arbiter or arbitration. An arbiter is a judge. That's all he is. An arbitration is a type of judicial sort of meeting. All right. Our subject is tempus, which is neuter, so it looks like it might be nominative, but it's the same in the nominative and accusative. Esse is our verb. And then alienum, although it's right next to proelium, and you might think it goes with that, it really goes with tempus. And they don't have the same endings because tempus is really neuter, which is why alienum is neuter. So, having judged that the time was unfavorable, or sort of the moment, maybe the moment was unfavorable, and then we have gerundives of purpose. It's unfavorable to do something. So we have to lacessendum hostem and to committendum proelium. So lacessendum means to provoke. So to provoke the enemy, and the committendum, when it's with proelium, means to begin battle. You can tell these are gerundives and not gerunds because they have these nouns they go with. So lacessendum describes hostem, they're accusative singulars, and then committendum describes proelium, they're also accusative singulars. So gerunds stand on their own, gerundives have nouns, they're adjectives. So literally it says the time's unfavorable for the enemy about to be provoked and the battle about to be begun. But in English that sounds silly. They are accusative because of the preposition odd, which also shows purpose. So because he thought these things, or he judged these things, suo se loco continuit. He contained his own, he contained, like his own people, he contained themselves, which is se, or himself. Suo loco, which goes together, and it's an ablative of place where, in his own place, which is very kind of vague sounding. He contained himself, he kept himself in his own place. Okay. So he's not branching the army out and attacking, basically. He's just kind of conserving his troops in one place. This is a nice little word picture too. The se is in suo loco, so it's like he himself is contained in the place. So the place is surrounding se. As breve tempore intermesso in castra legiones reduxit. We have another ablative absolute, sort of with a small amount of time having been in between, or having passed. In castra, into the camp, legiones reduxit, he led back the legions, or he sort of drew them back. So he sees the enemy and decides probably it's better to go back to camp. So he brings his legions back into camp. This is Caesar. Dum haec geruntur. So we've seen a lot of ablative absolutes, especially to start phrases. We had perturbatis nostris at the beginning, breve tempore intermisso, quo facto. To kind of break things up a little bit, we get dum haec geruntur, while these things, and then you have this is a real passive, it's not a deponent passive, while they were occurring, while they were being done, which the book mentions just a really long way of saying meanwhile, so like while these things are being done. And it couldn't be too long before we got another ablative absolute, because this next part is an ablative absolute. Nostris omnibus occupatis. With our men, and then omnibus, with all our men, having been occupied or having been kept busy. And the book mentions the things that they are doing are things like building the ships and foraging for food and guarding the camp and fighting the British. So he brought the legions back, and while these things are being done with our men having been occupied, the qui to agris is a relative clause, but it really refers to the reliqui, the remaining people. So you might want to take the reliqui first and then go to your relative clause. So like the remaining people who were in the fields, they departed. And the book mentions that reliqui might refer to the Romans, but probably refers to the British. So the remaining British who were in the fields departed. So things are kind of, where they all boiled up, this is kind of boiling down. You know, people are, okay, so bring back to the camp, and, okay, well, British are in the fields, I guess they'll leave. And then this part, secutae sunt continuos complores dies tempestates. Here we see, for the continuos complores dies, it's an ablative duration of time. Sorry, accusative duration of time. Os, ace, ace, those are accusative endings. Even though it doesn't come till the end, tempestates is your nominative, storms, and then you can take your secutae sunt, which is deponent, it's sequor, to follow. So, storms followed, for many, and for continuous you'll just say, continual or unbroken days, uninterrupted days. For several uninterrupted days, storms followed. And then we have this qui, which is really the beginning of a relative clause of characteristic, so the type of storms which. But the book mentions it has a resulty feel, so storms rose up with the result that. So I think you just say which, and we'll get the idea. So storms rose up for a number of days, which et nostros incastris continerent, et hostem a pugna prohiberent. So you have two ets there. Make sure you say both x and y, which both contained nostros, our men, in castris, in the camps, and prohiberented and prohibited are kept, the hostem, the enemy, a pugna, from the fight. So the storms, and then pugna is an ablative of separation. You keep someone from something, separated from them. So pugna is ablative of separation. In castris would be an ablative place where, right, they held our men in the camp, and kept the enemy from the fight. Interim, meanwhile, barbari nuntios in omnes partes demiserunt. The barbarians, messengers in all parts they sent out. So the barbarians, which are obviously the British, sent out messengers into all the parts. Paucitatemque nostrorum militum suis praedicaverunt. Praedicaverunt, you see it's dico dicare, which means to proclaim. And then there's just a pry in it. So it's that idea, like in English, we say proclaim, to talk about something in front of other people, which is the pry, like before them. And they proclaimed the paucitatem of nostrorum militum. Paucitatem, we have a word in English, paucity. If something's few, there's a paucity. It's the opposite of plethora. But in English, you could just say it's the small number. So they proclaim the small number. Nostrorum militum is genitive of our soldiers. Suis is dative. The east ending usually means ablative plural. But with words of things like announcing and saying, you expect datives. So they proclaimed something to someone. They proclaimed the small number of our soldiers to their own people. And then this next part is fun. We got lots of verbs. En quanta praedae faciendas atque in perpetuum sui liberandi facultas daretur, si Romanus castris expulsent demonstraverunt. All right, so our verbs here, we've got daretur, which is subjunctive, imperfect subjunctive, and passive. We have expuliscent, which is pluperfect subjunctive, active. And then demonstraverunt, which is just regular perfect indicative. We have two gerundives, faciendas and liberandi. So because all these other words are subjunctives, it's best to start with your indicative, because probably our subjunctives depend on our indicative, which is why they're subjunctives. So they pointed out, or they showed, we can go back to quanta praeda faciendae atque in perpetuum sui liberandi facultas. Facultas and quanta go together. How great the opportunity, or how great an opportunity. This facultas is feminine, and so quanta is also feminine, so you can see they go together. Quanta, with its how great, suggests that we have an indirect question. How great is the opportunity? So they pointed out how great the opportunity was. And here we can get our first subjunctive, how great an opportunity was given, as you have your passive daretur. So with opportunity, we have our genitive gerundives, which sort of show purpose. What kind of opportunity are there? Or what kind of opportunity is there? How great an opportunity is given. Praedae is loot, or like booty, like pirate's booty. And then faciendas is just facio, facere, to make. So literally it says, how great an opportunity is given for booty, or for loot, going to be made. And in English we just say to make loot, to get loot, to create loot. And an opportunity of themselves going to be freed, which is just going to be an opportunity to free themselves in perpetuum, forever. In English we have this phrase, in perpetuity, which we get from in perpetuum, which is perpetually. So that whole thing is they pointed out how great an opportunity was being given to make loot and to free themselves forever. And then we have a conditional. And the book talks about this for a while. It makes it sound more confusing than it really is. To translate, you just say, if they would expel the Romans from their camp. And the thing that's a little confusing is this is really a future condition, even though it's a pluperfect subjunctive, and if you translate it, it doesn't sound very future-y, right? What a great opportunity would be if they would expel the Romans from the camps. But the way you have to think about it is, what will the British actually say to each other? What they're saying when they point these things out is, if we will expel the Romans from the camps, there will be given a great opportunity of loot and freedom. So it's really from the point of view of what's the actual quote that the British would say, and it would be a future condition. If we will do this, then this thing will happen. But because it's in it's an indirect question, it's being reported, they pointed out that this thing would happen, it sounds past tense now. And the book kind of is on and on about tenses. So make sure you get your tenses and you know how the tenses work. But it's not as confusing as the book makes it out to be. His rebus coleriter magna multitudine peditatus equitatusque coacta ad castra venerunt. There we go. His rebus means by the means, or by means of these things, by means of these, like with these things. The book suggests we say by means of these speeches, because it discusses, or it refers back to them pointing these things out. So literally it says, with these things, but you can say by means of these speeches, celeriter, quickly, and then for magna to coacta, we get an ablative absolute. Coacta comes from the word cogo, which is really co or con ago. So it's really ago, augere, egi, octu. So you can see the octa there with a prefix, but it doesn't like this sort of vowel-y vowel, conocta, coocta. So it just drops the A and it says kogo, kogere, and then you have co-egi, co-octus. And you can get that ago, augere, egi, octus back in. So with a great number, and then we have some genitives of infantry and cavalry having been assembled, which is what coacta means. Con means together, and ago, augere means to drive. So to drive someone together means to assemble them. With a great number of these soldiers having been assembled, ad castra, to the camp, venerant, they came. So really, this whole sentence is these three words, without any of the extra stuff. All right, so go over this again. Make sure you don't have any questions. Make sure you're looking at the Latin and trying to put it together and see if you can, identify things like what's the subject, what's the object, who's verbing what or what's verbing who, and fitting in all your little ablative phrases, which there's quite a few of in this section of Book 4. And we'll work on Book 5 in class. Right? Or Chapter 5, Section 5, Paragraph 5. All right.